Welcome to episode 6 of the 2024 Planning Congress podcast. In partnership with the Planning Institute of Australia, UrbanTalk is hosting a special podcast series in the lead up to the Planning Congress in Melbourne, which will take place between the 22nd and the 24th of May. To start, I'd like to invite Elle Davidson from Zion Engagement and Planning to do an acknowledgement to the country.
Thanks so much. Great to be here today. I'm a Balangara woman from the East Kimberley, long way off country, dialing in today from Bundjalung country in northern New South Wales. And so I'd like to just start off by acknowledging the country that I'm dialing in from today and recording this podcast, and extend that respect to the traditional custodians where you're dialing in from, where you're listening to today, and also thank the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation for hosting us in Naarm for the Planning Congress next week.
Thanks, Ellie. The 2024 Congress theme is Reinvention, Planning in a Time of Change, and it's all about how the planning profession can seize opportunities in this moment of change. In this podcast, we'll invite some of the Congress speakers to discuss their topics to give you an insight to what you can expect from the 2024 National Congress. My name is Belinda Barnett, and I'm the podcast host. I acknowledge that I'm hosting this podcast from the lands of the Camaragal people. I also acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands on which you all work today, and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people participating in and listening to this podcast. I pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and celebrate the diversity of Aboriginal peoples and their ongoing cultures and connections to the lands and waters of New South Wales. In today's episode, we're going to discuss PIA's Country Knowledge Circle. Delegates attending the 2024 National Congress will be able to learn about and participate in various Knowledge Circle initiatives. To talk more about these initiatives, I'm delighted to be joined by Elle Davidson, who is the Director of Zion Engagement and Planning, and also an Aboriginal Planning Lecturer at the University of Sydney, and Rechelle Brookes, who is a recent graduate of Melbourne University, currently working at the Victorian Department of Energy, Environment and Climate Action. Rechelle, fantastically, was also awarded the 2023 SGS Economics Grand Lacombe Scholarship for Academic Excellence, and she has a genuine commitment to addressing inequality and social disadvantage. Before we deep dive into talking about PIA's Knowledge Circle, I wanted to start by unpacking what's meant by the terms planning with country and country-centred planning. Ellie, can you share what these terms mean to you?
Yeah, no worries. I think I was fortunate enough when I was in high school to learn about planning and what being a town planner means, and have been very fortunate to have a very long career in planning, and I definitely think that it's something that's a lifelong career for me and for many others. And I think as the profession has evolved and as we have really started to consider more deeply our impact on country, the fact that all planning, all cities, all regions, all towns, all parts of Australia are in fact on country, there is a deeper awareness and interest in understanding how we can work in collaboration with traditional custodians and people who are connected to country, and therefore what it means to plan with country. So it's not about planning on country, it's planning with country. For us as First Nations people, we see country as a living entity. She's living, alive, breathing. She can speak to us if we're willing to listen. And I think that this idea of using the word with country is about respecting that kind of personhood that we might place on country, and the way that we can plan with, in partnership, country. And so I think for us, it's this kind of notion that we're not planning on or doing for or to, it's about being in a reciprocal relationship with country and understanding as a profession what it means to more deeply understand the concept of country, how First Nations knowledges relate to country and how that relates to us as a profession. The reality is that planning as a profession is all about, land use management, thinking about our future, how we as people and communities are going to exist into the future, and how society is going to function on what some may consider land. But for us as First Nations people and in a growing way, the profession, It's more about understanding how we're doing that with country and in partnership with country, because I feel like there's so much to be learned, but also so much wisdom for us to lean into and appreciate if we're planning in that reciprocal relationship with country. We can see that there has been a lot of damage that's been done by imposing and importing these like Western notions of planning and science and engineering that have kind of got us to a particular point in our relationship with country. And we can see that country is sick and it needs healing, and we need healing as well. And so I think that this idea of planning with country is this invitation for partnership with country, partnership with First Nations knowledges, and truly understanding the benefits of what working in a different way might look like. And that kind of goes to country-centered planning, putting country at the center of all of our decision making rather than prioritizing economics or people or the function of cities. We need to reverse some of those things and put country at the center of our planning and our decision making. So I suppose it's this invitation in a lot of ways to rethink the prioritization that we place on how we think about our future and how we make decisions about our future in a country-centered way.
I really like the distinction that you make between the terms, I guess, on country and with country. I think really resonates, and it makes so much sense. Often I think people talk about or think about planning with country to do with natural environments, but that's not the case, is it? It applies to all planning, both in urban environments and also in natural environments. Let's move to talk about PIA's Knowledge Circle. The Country Knowledge Circle, it was first convened in 2021 and is an Indigenous-led group of Indigenous and non-Indigenous built and natural environment leaders who guide PIA through a recognition response on reconciliation. Can you both share with listeners how you became involved in the Knowledge Circle? Rechelle, would you like to start?
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to jump in. I'd like to start by acknowledging that I'm on Bunurong country down in Naarm, and I give my thanks and respect to elders and to community members from Bunurong and Wurundjeri and Boonwurrung who also have long been custodians of Naarm, where I grew up and live currently. Elle was one of the original Knowledge Circle members, and recently there was an expansion in the number of members, recognising the incredible work that they've done, but also, I guess, the demand on people's times. So I sit on the Knowledge Circle as an ally, and as part of that, I really see my role as supporting and doing a lot of the, I guess, kind of the groundwork to help support the First Nations members of the Knowledge Circle to really take charge and take lead. There's a lot of interface with planning and kind of Western systems. As an ally, as someone who was brought up in that culture, I think I have a responsibility, and we have a responsibility to kind of undo some of the damage that my people have done. So yeah, I was invited to be part of the Knowledge Circle, I think through my relationship with Michelle Howard, a fantastic social planner, and I really admire her work, and she's become a little bit of a mentor to me, and we kind of had lots of really great conversations when I was doing my master's and different research as part of my studies. And so yeah, she and I formed a really great relationship, and that's how I got invited in.
Thank you. And how about you, Elle?
I suppose in an official way, I was invited to be involved in these conversations. I believe it was in 2019. It's hard to put particular lines in the sand with time, and maybe it was 2020. It was around the time that COVID was happening. So a lot of our initial meetings were online. I think that we were kind of gathering as a group online for at least a year before we all got to meet in person. I was fortunate enough to already know a couple of the OG or original members of the group on the circle. And so it really, I think in terms of becoming involved, it's really been about relationship, which I think is a really important kind of First Nations principle and cultural protocol. People who had a relationship with PIA, who'd been working with them in this space, had been invited in. And then, as Rechelle talked about, the expansion kind of happened through our networks and through people that we've known. So I think it's probably a really important principle for us in terms of building from relationship, building from those connections that had already been established and through people who had been committed to this space and had been kind of leading the way in a lot of respects when it comes to planning with country. So I sort of was approached by PIA. I'd already started having conversations with them in this way a number of years ago. So very thankful for the invitation, and it's been incredible to see the group expand, but also to see our impact and understand the kind of part that we play in helping to support the profession in their journey and coming alongside individuals.
What is the overarching vision that the Knowledge Circle is seeking to achieve?
I think everybody has a bit of a different way of thinking about it. We do talk a lot about decolonising the system. I remember some of the early conversations that I had with the former CEO, David Williams. He was an incredible colleague, ally, mentor. And I can't tell you how many times he asked me, now, Ellie, explain to me what decolonising the system means. And, we'd sit down and have these really big yarns. And I suppose his curiosity to understand that. But then I suppose that there's also, it's a term that means different things to different people, because we engage with the colonized system in different ways, depending on the type of planner that we are, the type of work that we're doing, the structures and the regime and the policies and procedures and everything that sit behind what we do that govern how we practice planning looks different to planners. And so I think that that's part of the beauty of it, that everybody brings their own interpretation of that and understanding and awareness of that. And I think it really does start with individuals reconciling with the notion of the fact that they work within a colonial system, and that in a lot of ways they are participating in the continued colonization of country and of First Nations knowledges and the privilege that's placed on Western ways of thinking and knowing and being and doing, and the way that individuals bring that to their profession and to their practice, I think is a really big part of what we invite people to think about, because it's not just this thing that kind of happens over there, or only people who are working in the native title space. You don't have to think about looping back to what I shared earlier about planning with country. Regardless of where you work in Australia, you're planning on country, on somebody's country that people have been connected to for thousands of years. And, whether that's in an urban context or not, or in a regional context or not, I think every planner has a responsibility to understand and to step back and to reflect on their own cultural framework and their own professional practice, and really scratch the surface of where do these concepts come from. And if we trace them back, there are all of these imported notions of planning that have come from elsewhere. And once we really kind of take stock of that and then take up the responsibility of unlearning and relearning, I think that that's a really big kind of vision of each of ours. I suppose from a knowledge circle perspective, everybody kind of shows up with a different idea of what we're there to do, except it is this kind of collective commitment to helping individuals and the profession more broadly understand their role in working with country and planning with country, and helping to support them on that journey.
Rechelle, can you tell us how the Knowledge Circle is influencing, PIA's reconciliation journey? Yeah,
it's kind of really interesting and really relates to what Ellie said, in that there's so many different layers to this. There's kind of PIA as an organisation, and then, there's all the members and all of us planners who PIA influences as well. And then, as Ellie spoke about, there's kind of the broader planning system. And so the Knowledge Circle really kind of tries to influence at those three levels of PIA as an organisation, planners as individuals, and then the profession and the systems within which we work. And obviously you need different approaches to influence change in all of those spheres. They're all quite different. PIA as an organisation has been really receptive and really acknowledging the history of planning and potentially the history of their own organisation in what that means for what's happened here in Australia. And lots of members in the profession are as well. We try and take, as Ellie spoke about, a really relational approach. It's lots of conversations. It's lots of providing space for people to ask questions and be curious and get informed, but then also lots of knowledge sharing. I think it's also really important for the Knowledge Circle and for PIA to show what is possible. In Australia, reconciliation kind of often gets pushed into the too hard basket because we forget that we sadly live in a world where colonisation happened in lots of different places, but really beautifully, a lot of those places are having their own journeys. And I think it's really important to show an example of what reconciliation can look like in practice for people to be inspired and kind of learn.
Are you able to, is the knowledge circle, I guess, able to be, I'm not sure whether infiltrating is the right term, but being part of discussions with government on planning reform, legislation, planning processes?
I personally haven't been part of those discussions, but I'm sure that PIA does have those discussions. I know one of the tools PIA uses is putting out kind of policy statements and kind of say, we as an industry body, this is what we want to see, and really encouraging government to make those changes. I think when we all met up in person in Naarm, there was a lot of focus, not so much on government, but on education, because like government is this really big system and a really big beast, but within it, there's all these individual planners. People make decisions and people have a lot of power within government. And so there seemed to be, through the conversations we had, a real focus on how do we educate the planners coming up through the system who become those people in power and who become those people within government to kind of make those changes. So I'm sure there are kind of, top-down conversations happening, but kind of taking that relational approach and that education approach is something that the Knowledge Circle has done and is keen to continue to do.
Yeah, that's a really good point about the education. Elle, because you're keen to talk to that point. What is happening in the education space that the Knowledge Circle has been able to influence or create change?
Yeah, I mean, I think a really big part of what we've been focused on is the Congress program. And over the last couple of years, a huge part of our time as a circle has been focused, as Rechelle said, like looking inward, building our own relationships, helping each other understand where we see the opportunities and kind of developing a bit of a strategy for the Knowledge Circle and how we want to kind of support PIA in this change. But we see Congress and the Congress program as a really big opportunity for learning and for education and I suppose really helping us to harness that platform. We have over 700 people in the plenary session, so that's a really decent number of people within the planning industry who are kind of there and open to learning and have committed their time to come along and to listen. So, a big focus for us has been on Congress and the Congress program, as well as supporting our state. PIA is built around state organisations and they have their own events and ways that they connect with their membership. And so we've been also looking to support what's happening at the state levels at those kind of more local conversations and really helping to provide input and an opportunity to think about country in those contexts. We've also been very instrumental in a review of the program for the Awards for Excellence as well, including a Planning with Country category into those awards, and then also changing the way that those awards are, the expectations around the information that people submit as part of their awards process, and encouraging people to note the country that they're on, detail any partnerships that they've had with traditional custodians in pulling those particular projects together. So I suppose really trying to help influence at a national and state level and supporting people in that process has been a really big part of what we've been looking to achieve over the last couple of years.
Thanks, Elle. And that's a great segue into what we're going to talk about next, which is, I guess, the Knowledge Circle at Congress. A significant Knowledge Circle theme of the 2024 Congress carries through the plenary sessions, which is First Stories First. And Elle, you'll be one of the speakers at those sessions. Can you share with us what delegates can expect?
Yeah, I think over the last couple of years, we've really been trying to prioritise First Nations knowledges as they relate to the planning profession. So this year, we've been really fortunate to work with PIA and the program committee to basically have the first 2 plenary sessions dedicated to First Nations people. So all going well, and how things are tracking. First Nations people will be the only people on stage up until the lunch break on the Thursday's program. So essentially, a quarter of the whole program of Congress is going to be dedicated to First Nations people, and that's within that plenary context with everybody in the room together. And then throughout the concurrent sessions that happen over the rest of the next day and a half, we have particular planning with country streams. And at Rechelle's recommendation, which I thought was a really great way to think about it, we've actually, in one of the concurrent sessions, instead of it being in one room, all of the First Nations kind of knowledges and projects being focused in one room, we've actually dispersed them across the 3 different kind of concurrent sessions that are happening, which means that people aren't necessarily needing to opt into the conversation, but it's showing that whatever we're talking about, there is a First Nations lens that can be brought to those conversations. So I think that we ended up with about 10 to 13 abstracts of First Nations people within the concurrent sessions. So outside of just the plenary sessions when everybody's in the room together, we will also have those conversations unfolding throughout the concurrent sessions as well. So we're really excited about the layered learning opportunities that are going to be provided to delegates. And it's interesting, even for me, I have a hard time not going to the Planning with Country sessions because I like supporting people who are working in this space. I love learning about what other people are doing, but it's also like a really incredible way to understand who the allies are, within the peer community, and take stock, I suppose, of the lean into this space and to this way of listening and learning. So we're really excited about all of the opportunities that people are going to have to sit under this type of knowledge and conversation.
Yeah, that's going to be very powerful. That is a really great outcome. Rechelle, how would you like Congress, I guess, to influence delegates in terms of helping them to develop and refine their skill set for working with First Nations communities? What are your hopes?
I really hope that, I guess, above all, people walk away with an understanding and appreciation for the relationships required, and that it's not kind of a ticker box engagement that is sufficient now, and it's not really a space you can kind of step in and step out of when it suits you as government. I spoke about it earlier, but I really personally learn from hearing examples and hearing stories of what's being done elsewhere, and really appreciate people sharing their knowledge and their experiences and their learnings. I think stories and seeing something in practice really resonates so much more than kind of just talking through kind of an abstract set of principles. So yeah, I really encourage people to listen and engage, but then also go away and reflect and think about how that applies to their context. Like Ellie said, hanging out in the planning with country stream. I've been to a couple of conferences which have similar streams, and hanging out in that room is such a great community almost, and a really great way to meet people and make connections. So if people can walk away with some new contacts and some new people to ring up and potentially work with or ask questions of, or, share stories with beyond the Congress as well, then that would be a fantastic outcome.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's wonderful to be able to learn from other people's experiences. I guess it's also a great way to take things from a high-level discussion to that sort of practical knowledge that you can actually take back and apply daily in your work.
Yeah, I also think, when we're talking about planning with country, there are hundreds of nations across Australia, so you kind of can't have these high-level discussions because you kind of miss the point. You have to engage with country and, like Ellie said, engage in that reciprocal relationship. So it has to be embedded in context and embedded in place, as we say in planning, embedded in country to have these conversations.
One of the workshops, Rising to the Challenge of Country-Centred Planning, which from the description that I've read about it sounds fabulous and it sounds very hands-on. Ellie, what will delegates take away from that workshop, from participating in that workshop? which I believe now is sold out. So anybody listening who hasn't signed up for it is going to be disappointed. But for everyone who's signed up for it, what can they expect?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a really great and interactive conversation that people will really walk away with some practical ideas around, how to embed this into their practice. As Rechelle mentioned earlier, Michelle Howard will actually be one of the people running and facilitating that session. She's an incredible ally and has been very committed to this space for a long time. And so I just like to acknowledge and pay my respects to her contribution to these conversations. And also Carol Vale, who's a Dunghutti woman, has been part of the OG or Original Planning with Country Knowledge Circle for the last couple of years. She's an incredible First Nations woman running her own business and really helping to support better outcomes in this space. So I thought I might just read a little bit from the abstract, because I think that it would do more justice than me explaining. But it says, a country-centred approach to planning and built environment is not mysterious and unreachable. Building your own capacity and that of your team requires personal reflection, a thinking of values and assumptions, listening and engagement with Indigenous knowledge and perspectives, realignment of processes and recalibration of how we define good outcomes. How do we know what is good for country? How do we listen to country? How do we align our planning processes and priorities with a country-centred approach? How do we work respectfully together? So there's some of the questions that I believe Michelle and Carol will be covering, and hopefully delegates will walk away with a better sense of how they can participate in responding to those questions and making a contribution, I think, to our industry and better outcomes on country.
It sounds fabulous, it does. And I really like, again, the focus on sort of educating about what is a good outcome. Let's talk a little bit about what constitutes meaningful engagement with First Nations communities, because you both work a lot in that space. I'm going to start with Rechelle. Congratulations again on receiving the SGS Economics and Planning Graham Lycan Scholarship last year. You were very passionate about developing a more democratic planning process, and central to that is promoting meaningful stakeholder engagement. I found a quote from you in my research for the podcast, and you said, "We need to move beyond current forms of stakeholder engagement. The planning process should democratically involve communities. If we create more space for community voices, we can accurately reflect their values and needs in the built environment." Can you share some of your ideas about how our profession can start achieving this outcome?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Belinda. I'm also really thankful to SGS for giving me this award, and there's been some fantastic opportunities that have come out of it. So yeah, I'm really, really grateful for that. I think planning is massive. It really covers everything in the built environment. And Ellie spoke way back at the beginning of this yarn about what we prioritize, and do we focus on roads and transport, or do we focus on country first, or do we focus on communities? And I think in my personal experiences in a lot of the profession, there is a focus on kind of physical outcomes. What does a building look like? Where do the roads need to go? But for me personally, I really strongly believe that those physical elements mean nothing without a community involved and a community behind them. What really drew me to planning was its ability to kind of turn visions for the future into a reality. And, we live in a democratic country, but there are limits to that as it stands at the moment. And I think we really need to not even empower, because communities are already speaking out. We just need to listen to communities about the future that they want and then figure out how to make it happen. In Victoria, it's kind of a bit unique in planning in Australia in that we have statewide controls, and I've done quite a bit of work out in East Gippsland on Gunai country with a whole lot of communities out there, and kind of the statewide planning controls were designed and planned in Melbourne, and were designed and planned with a really specific purpose, which doesn't meet a lot of communities' needs out in rural areas. And it kind of, the system allows for a little bit for context and nuance and communities' wants, but communities aren't really listened or encouraged to really take charge. In planning, you kind of engage with communities when you need something from them. You need their tick of approval. And I think there needs to be a real shift to start with the community and go, what do they need? And then work up from there. rather than having discussions so far away and kind of coming up with ideas and then going out to the community. I think the way that we engage and kind of the schedule of engagement really needs to change.
Yeah, I agree with you. The way the legislation works, it happens way too late after the whole development or the whole policy has actually already been formulated. And you're responding to something, aren't you? Communities are responding to something, they're reacting to something, and which makes it very difficult. Elle, as an Aboriginal woman and planner and the director of an award-winning consultancy, how do you approach First Nations-led planning? And for you, what lies at the heart of meaningful First Nations engagement?
Very big question.
It's a very big question.
Yeah, I think for me, it really starts with acknowledging First Nations people as the first planners. Once we kind of step back and realise that there was a very complex system of working and planning with country that existed here prior to colonisation and prior to European people bringing their Western notions of planning, we then have the opportunity to go, oh, what did that look like? And how can we sit and listen and, I suppose, accept the fact that our way of thinking about things from a Western perspective isn't the only way. And maybe, it's also about stepping back and realizing that some of the things that we have brought here have caused a lot of the issues and the damage and some of the things that are irreversible, in terms of the impact that we've had in this short time that people, have lived here from a colonial context in comparison to thousands of years of people living in tune with country, having that really connected relationship and reciprocity with country that allowed them to be here for thousands of years and not impact the resources and the systems in the way that we have in the short time that we've been here. So I think that is the basis of what we stand on and that we try to advocate for is prioritising First Nations knowledges and prioritising the idea that First Nations people are the first planners here in Australia and have a lot of wisdom and connection to place and to country that can inform better outcomes for our future. And then I think the other thing is it's not necessarily just about being in reciprocity with country. I mean, we love doing full circle moments in this space. And as we spoke about at the beginning, the idea of reciprocity with country meaning planning with country. It's also about reciprocity with community and reciprocity with culture, what it looks like for us to partner with communities, not just engage. I think that this, as Rechelle was just saying, is transactional, nature of ticking a box and just doing what you have to do because that's what the legislation requires and moving along your linear process and actually thinking about how do we have relationships with community and relationships with country that break down those project silos, that break down those policies and procedures and ways of thinking about a process that we might move through that's very much based in this kind of Western way of planning. And thinking about partnering with communities, partnering with country and establishing those foundations of reciprocity and not just what we need to do, but how can we give back? How can we leave a legacy? And how can we bring some of that intergenerational thinking that's such a core cultural principle and cultural protocol for us as First Nations people? And so that's essentially, I suppose, the space that we come from and what we try to achieve in working with communities. And, even though a lot of our work and a lot of our clients are government agencies, we see ourselves as working for country, working for community, prioritising their knowledges and their connection and prioritising country in a really country-centred way is certainly what we aim to achieve in the work that we do.
Fantastic. Thank you. Well, I'm going to bring the podcast to a close now. Elle and Rechelle, thank you for sharing your insights and experiences with me today. PIA's Knowledge Circle is helping to give a voice to First Nations communities through our planning processes and is making great inroads to ensuring we come together with humility and respect. If you have any questions, please email congress@planning.org.au. My name is Belinda Barnett and thank you for listening to the 2024 Planning Congress podcast.